Welcome. In this video, we're going to have a breakdown of Ssangsu Geombup 6, Part 1. Usual spiel at the beginning of these sorts of videos. Again, the form itself is canonical, but the ideas associated with it are going to be generally non-canonical. So keep that in mind as we go through it. Yeah. Yeah. Let's take a look at that first segment using a wooden sword, which is usually a good way to kind of get used to that initial kind of weird draw. Let's take a look. From here, knowing that this is more a prototype and how it's going to actually end up, getting used to that motion, right? So generally 3 pieces to this one. You're going to step your left foot on top of the right. There are nuances to that I'll add in a little bit, but the idea is draw perfectly straight up as I cross. You're going to notice I'm kind of clamping this with my thumb here overhead in a neutral stance. You're going to bring that back foot over as I bring the weapon down into that position. So obviously you should be deeper than where I am, right? So this is a yoke, so to say, or a short stance. So from here, you're going to twist up, bring it around the head, one-handed cross-cut into a defense, and we'll talk about the rest of it in a little bit. But let's start off with some of those details, right? So instead of coming around this way, right? Obviously very caricatured here, right? So instead of having kind of the looping action, think about almost like the ball of your foot is trying to strike, just barely going past your knee. As I step, ball of the foot just past the calf, step. So almost like striking movements hitting the ground. Same thing, right? So up, over, again striking down as I come down with that strike. One thing that I'm not sure if I added over the years or something that I just found to be kind of helpful. So instead of starting with that initial step here, especially if I'm trying to get momentum in that direction, I'm going to take that lead leg step first. That's going to give me some linear momentum first. So in that same idea, step, up, over, down, right? And as you get more comfortable with that, you're going to add more height to that jump, and eventually most of it's in the air, right? So instead of 1, 2, 3, it's going to be more, you can lead using a jumping off point with the left foot, lead up, 1, 2, and then finishing off the rest of that combination. With a scabbard, not so bad, right? The scabbard is essentially going to dig into the hip and essentially stay there, right? As I'm coming up, perfectly upright, you can probably keep your left hand on that scabbard if you really want to do that, you can. But from here, just come up and land. And same idea, you're going to add some height to it. So you're going to think more about striking with the butt of the sword down and then following through as a technique. But let's also start talking about what these things could be doing, right? So it's the actual hitting with the butt of the sword or pommel of the sword is a legitimate strike, and this is kind of like the first time you really do it, at least in a Gumdo form, right? So this is really nice, especially if you're fighting someone in armor, right? Because this is still gonna rattle them a little bit, ring their bell. It's also, generally speaking, a very powerful strike anyway, right? Now, if I just like the kind of the story behind this is like, well, I'm facing this way. There's someone right there who's presumably also facing that way, or maybe he's looking away or whatever. I guess technically if you believe the theory behind the next move, it would actually be facing me. But I would essentially look at them from the side and just be like jumping up. And again, hitting them maybe in the forehead, maybe in the center of the chest, and then using this as a follow through, right? I think some people think this might be using it as a block, But considering I had to jump to get in there, why would I jump in to block when I could just stay right here and let them swing, and then I could just stab them from here. Anyway, but the idea is going to be using the pommel, right, to strike someone over the head and follow through, and then from here, allegedly hit them in the head, follow through, again using the butt of the sword again to strike them under the jaw, and coming around, again, formally, my target area is here as I do my cross cut and move on. However, as I'm going to practice with my comrades, we're going to actually show how you can use this in a different way, right? But you can also be thinking about striking that one person. So either, I was going to say chin, but forehead, throat, or even sternum, follow through, hit him under the jaw. As you're prepping, maybe making some light contact over here and drag through, and now you face off against someone. The draw in isolation can actually work kind of well if someone's coming with a Senrika. Again, I'm going to show this a little more later, but theoretically, I can use this, using this as a cover, still using it as a cover as I get closer to pommel them, drive through, maybe hitting the arm, and then now doing the rest of the form as intended from here. So there are ways we're going to make this work. Just knowing the initial idea is just a pommel to the side. Oh, there's another way that you can interpret this, is the way that I was taught initially, is that someone is starting to draw their sword, right? And the butt of the sword is essentially catching him right here to prevent him from drawing. So I would like for you to first think about that. I'm going to have a dramatic pause first, and I'm going to be like, hey, if that's true, why this? So dramatic pause, and now, okay, someone's drawing their sword. How long does it take to draw a sword? And that was kind of lazy, right? And that wasn't particularly the best or cleanest draw, right? But it doesn't take as long as it takes to jump and land on top of that person, right? So yes, can you use the hook of your arm to stop them from drawing? Sure, you can if you're going for like the non-harmful route. An alternative is if they are trying to draw out is just to strike them in the wrist and they can't draw the sword because wrist is damaged. So a lot of different ways you can interpret that first movement. The way that I find the most useful is more straightforward as opposed to the side, although you could still make it sort of work. But from there, let's keep going, and we're going to play with our little stabs. So the idea is, in opposition to what we did in our previous form. Our previous form, we stepped with it. Again, tip essentially staying where it is, but I kind of push my body into a stronger position so that I can thrust. This I'm actually deflecting first and then just sliding in with that thrust, deflect, and thrust. So this is at distance already. So there's a few ways, again, I'm going to do this with a partner soon, but the general idea is going to be one layer of this could be move their tip out of the way and thrust, move their tip out of the way and thrust. Pretty straightforward, right? However, if you ever pressure test this, the moment you push their sword out of the way and you start to thrust, they're just going to deflect you right offline, and you're going to be kind of awkward being like, eh, right? So an alternative to that is same initial step, putting pressure on their side. Whoop, sorry, wrong footwork. Putting pressure on their side. As I thrust, again, expecting them to push it off to the side here. Now instead of going around, you go to the other side. Dip, make contact with the back of their sword, and now thrust again. So theoretically, if you do this quickly enough, that's kind of the key point of this one, you might be able to land that second thrust. The first thrust is almost guaranteed not to work because we're both at distance. I'm watching you to do something that I can, work against. If you just push my sword off to the side, I'm gonna be like, no, stop it, right? So this is at a point where we're both hyper aware of each other. versus if you started that combination, you deflected me, start to stab, I push you offline, thinking like, yeah, like that was really stupid of you, and now you're here, shoving my sword on my weak side. I'm gonna be like, oh no, I'm gonna have to really pull back in kind of a weird way, or move back this way, which would be a better way. But theoretically, if you're fast enough and you're on my weak side, you'll still be able to land something. So the very first part is to demonstrate the idea of that stopping the draw, right? So I'm going to take out the jump for now, just because the distance would play a major role with all of that. So you can probably already kind of see where some of the red flags are flying. But if my sword is already drawn, where I can use essentially the hook here, as he starts to draw his sword, I can come in and stop it here. I can draw it back, draw it back in, hit underneath the jaw. If I want to be a jerk, I could hit, I could hit him, follow through with that cut, and defense. Now, as you can probably already note, if my sword was already drawn and he's going to draw his sword, I can just stab him, right? There's no reason for me to stop him from drawing the sword, unless if I really want this to stay a non-lethal engagement. However, if I do attempt to actually do it from a draw and from distance, so theoretically, I see him, he has a sword getting ready, I am going to jump and try to slide it back in and then hit. Notice what happens if he's not letting me win. This way. So is it possible I can nail him in the head with this? Sure, but he can also just fully remove my arm and things are just generally not going to work in my favor. That said, if we're both here, so this is actually from a different style. Another technique is actually just using the hilt of my guard to essentially strike his wrist or stop him from drawing. That was all bone. And drawing back in, and from here, if I want to, I can either maintain pressure, grab, or do something like that. I can do a lot of fun stuff, including hitting someone's bone with the hilt of my weapon. So those are all interpretations of that initial motion if you want to take it from a stopping them from drawing perspective. The other interpretation that I like, so note that I am going straight on, so it's actually very similar to the draw and put away of this form as opposed to me going on this way. It still can work. I think it's just a little bit easier to see going straight on this way. So it's coming off a center cut, so if he does give me a center cut, I can use this as a cover, and as I'm sliding past him this way, I'm going to let this collapse. I'm going to be hitting him with the butt of the weapon, either trying to hit him in the face or even aiming for the arm. As I let the sword fall through this way, again, I can hit the inside of the elbow to make sure he loses contact with that, hit him in the chest, forehead, and again, fall through. If I want to, I can even fall through here. So I have a little, where are you letting go of the sword? I guess you can let go of the sword, but this will help me get some control over him. So if I want to, I can hit him on the side of the jaw, and then doing all of this fun stuff. So if we try that a little bit more at speed, he comes in, up, this way. Again, I can either hit with the chest, again, using the weight of my more horizontal stance to be able to push in a little bit more, and then be able to hit him. Again, with this, I also don't want to hurt his jaw, and again, following up with all those combinations. Let's try going the other way as well. Again, slowly at first, so you have the idea, right? So if he comes in with that center cut, going straight in this way. Again, as I follow through, again, trying to get my body out of the way of this incoming center cut this way. Again, either hitting forehead, chest, or the inside of the elbow, down, hit underneath, and then follow through with all that fun stuff. But taking a concept that we mentioned a little bit earlier, but again, trying to go with a mostly non-lethal end to this confrontation. So something that you can do. So notice that so far the entirety of that motion is one-handed, right? So if I'm here and he gives me that center cut, again, the idea is using the initial brunt to absorb it, and then using this to follow through again with a strike. If I really just want to grapple, I can bring it in here, grab again the inside of the sword, and if I need to, I can kind of like manhandle him a little bit with the threat of the weapon as opposed to necessarily going in with a lethal strike, again, for the jugular or anything like that. So remember that you have your offhand, so you can actually, again, try to control the opponent's weapon so that you can, live another day. And in this case, hopefully your opponent can as well. So applying that thrust a little bit, right? So the way that's usually taught is if we're here, again, putting pressure on the side of his weapon as I thrust in. And if I need to, I can go to the other side, put pressure in, and thrust in. However, if your opponent gives you any feedback or doesn't in fact want to be stabbed for the convenience of it, if I'm here, usually when I pressure on one side, he's going to pressure in retaliation. So by applying pressure and coming in with that thrust, I'm expecting him again to put more pressure on this side. So if I need to, I can duck under, whoop, aiming for the mid of his sword. So even if he does start to apply pressure as I'm thrusting, at most I'm going to maybe still catch him in the arm. At worst, I still be able to get him underneath the diaphragm and follow through. So if we try it the other way, so if I pressure, and as I thrust, he's going to pressure back. Again, duck under, again, aiming for his mid. So I can go in for that thrust again. Ideally, I'm going to be keeping my sword in a strong enough place. So if I do come with that thrust, I'm not walking into a thrust this way. So just be aware of the angle here, right? So in the form, you're going to end perfectly upright this way. Just know, in theory, you should probably keep some protection here as you thrust, so you don't walk into your opponent's stab, because they will, and he will. So have some fun with that. But that's the idea with the introduction of Ssangsu 6, right? So a little bit weird, right? So when you think about the direction of the forms are going, obviously form 1 facing forward, form 2, form 3, form 4, form 5, which is interesting, form 6, we almost never really go this direction again, although you could theoretically just do Ssangsu 1 just that way, but that's apparently too mild, not spicy enough for us to have in a new form. But with that in mind, make sure you stay safe, stay humble, and keep training.